New Thought Media Network is proud to present New Thought's Roots and Branches with Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller. Join us every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Mountain Time. Tune in live or watch anytime on our YouTube channel. Discover the rich history of New Thought and its impact on modern spirituality. Join Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller as she shares insights, stories, and teachings that inspire and uplift. Experience deep insights and transformative teachings that connect you to the roots of New Thought. Visit our YouTube channel to catch up on past episodes and join us live every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Connect with us and be part of the journey.
Well, hello there. I am Ruth Miller, and this is New Thoughts, Roots, and Branches. And if you've been moving along with us, you have learned a little bit about the deep, deep history of some of the ideas that we call New Thought. And hopefully you've learned some about the people that have brought it to us in our more modern day. If we look at the first chart in our series, we have that set of things that make sense. Our topic today is going to be Johnnie Colemon, absolutely. Johnnie Colemon, if you're not familiar with her, is responsible for thousands of churches, really, hundreds of centers and churches around the world, and thousands of people being really, really awakened to the New Thought idea. And Johnnie grew up in the Unity tradition. And if we look at the next chart, we'll see where top part being the ancients, into the Middle European, and then the Americans, and way down there at the bottom, among the branches of New Thought, we have Johnnie Colemon in her rectangle. And in the next slide, you can see there's a photo of her in that circle. She really is making a huge difference, as we will see as we move through this experience. So who is Johnnie Colemon? Many people haven't heard of her. Well, if we look at the next slide, you will see that she is the founder of the Christ Unity Temple, which later was called the Universal Temple, Christ Universal Temple. She is the founder of the Foundation for Better Living, and she founded a school that after she passed on was named the Johnnie Colemon Institute. And she did all of that in the south side of Chicago, which interestingly started out just a few blocks from where I lived when I was going to elementary school. In the next slide, you get to see this beautiful woman in all her glory. The top black and white photo was when she was just becoming ordained. And we can kind of see her evolution over the years. She started being a Unity preacher in 1956, and she retired in 2006. 50 years of doing this work. Pretty amazing stuff. In the next slide, let's learn a little bit about how she got started in this. Johnnie was the son, the desired son who ended up being a girl of John Haley. So she was Johnnie Haley, and everybody knew they had to take care of Johnnie Haley because her dad was there to protect her. She was born in Centerville, Alabama, but very quickly her father was given the position of brigman on the Mobile Railroad, the train that went between Columbus, Mississippi, and Mobile, Alabama. So from very young, this young Johnnie, who is later called JC, got to ride on the boxcars and really get familiar with what was going on in the railroad. And as she says, I was a little John Haley. Yep. I had to be like the boy. I had to do all the things in sports the boys would do. So what she tells us is her father built a basketball court at the back of their house, and he gave a lecture to all the boys. He said, now this is my baby. You better make sure she never gets hurt. And so she says, the boys would all let me win because my father was bad, John Haley. And then she says, he didn't know anything about truth. He was a very large man, and he held his own, and he was very highly respected in the community. Johnnie, when she was growing up, she said she could go into any store and, ask for whatever she wanted, and everyone would give it to her because she was Johnnie Haley. Interesting, huh? Fun way to grow up. However, her mom was the teacher at the local high school. So if we look, we find out that Johnnie went on for schooling to become a teacher. There's a real reason for all that happening, but as she moved forward, she ended up applying to and being accepted at a school called Wiley College outside of Marshall, Texas. Now, if you're not familiar with how things worked in the 19th century in this country, almost every market town had a church that established a college. They were usually congregational, sometimes Baptist, Methodist. If you're an Oregonian, Philomath was the Methodist church. If Linfield was the Congregational church, etc., they created their colleges. And Wiley College was the college for the church in Marshall, Texas. And she points out that she was not the owner of a couple of oil wells, and her skin wasn't quite the right color. So, as she put it, she had to be extra smart. So we're looking at the 1920s to 40s here. She was born in 1920 and she graduated in 1943 and then moved back to Mississippi to teach. And then she and her mother moved up to Chicago, where she became a teacher there too. However, she tells us, you know what I wanted to be? A saxophone player. One of the things about Johnnie Colemon that may not be obvious, except if you think about her playing basketball all the time, she grew to be 5 foot 9.5 inches tall. And can you imagine this tall, skinny girl being a saxophone player? It can be amazing to imagine that. But she also wanted to be in a chorus line. She said she wanted to be in a line like the Rockettes. That's what she wanted to be. Well, that's not what she ended up being. She was a teacher after all. If we go into the next slide, we'll find out a little more about why her father, this incredibly big, bad John Haley, died when she was 15. So she was a gangly girl who had never done anything that girls do. They didn't even have a doll in the house. So at 15, her mom begins to teach her what it means to be a girl in our culture. And going to college, becoming a teacher was part of that. And then in Chicago, she was diagnosed with an incurable disease. The story is amazing. Johnnie talks about it as wasn't feeling very well. She'd gone to get some tests. She got a phone call. And in the phone call, they let her know that she had a very limited time on this planet based on this disease. And she was reeling, and she fell against the coffee table, and there was a bunch of magazines, and one of them was on the floor, and it opened up to, she looked down to the floor, and it opened up to a page in the Daily Word, Unity magazine, and it said, "God is my healer." Johnnie had never heard anything like that. And she's hit the floor. She's made this noise. Her mom comes running into the room. "What is it, child?" And then her mom sees this magazine that Johnnie is looking at. And she says, "Girl, I've had those magazines all over this house for months hoping you would read them." Well, it took that wake-up call. I call all of those diagnoses wake-up calls for Johnnie to wake up. She immediately went to Unity Village with this magazine in hand. And she got to the receptionist, who was somewhat shocked, this very tall Black woman in front of her. And the woman says, "May I help you?" And Johnnie says, "I came here to be healed." And the woman doesn't quite know what to do with that. And she went and found one of the teachers, and the teacher said, You don't have to die. And that was the beginning of the unfolding of Johnnie Colemon's path as one of the most remarkable preachers of New Thought and teachers of New Thought ideas that this world has seen. So let's go on. She went ahead, she enrolled in the Institute. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Unity Institute is in Unity Village. Unity Village is on the edge of a town called Lee's Summit, Missouri. We're looking at 1950 something, before Martin Luther King, before the Civil Rights Act, and at a time when Missouri, which had been one of the states fighting the Civil War, was still saying that a Black person could not occupy the same building as people of lighter skin. So for 2 years, she attended Unity Institute. Can you imagine all of the money that she had saved as a teacher, and all of that, using all of that to stay in the YWCA in Kansas City, and then be transferred or be shuttling. She was driving and paying for the gas 15 miles each way to Unity Village. Finally, in her 3rd year, she went in and she said, this is not acceptable. The contrast between the love and the wisdom of the Unity literature and everything they were studying, and this idea that her skin color prevented her from being there with the other students, just overwhelmed her. She was not the first one to go through this. Barbara King went through this and ended up setting up her own system in Florida. Others had gone through it before her, but she stood up for her rights. And in 1955, she was able to help the Unity Village and Lee's Summit and ultimately Missouri change their laws and their rules so that she could stay in what is called the Gardener's Cottage on the campus there at Unity Village. It's a sweet cottage. I wouldn't mind living there, but it was also separate. She wasn't able to live in the dorms. She had to live in a separate cottage. It was still a little rough to do, but she completed the program. And as we go on to the next slide, we'll find out that the year that she completed the program, 1956, she was the head of her class. The next year, she was elected president of the Association of Unity Churches, which today is called Unity Worldwide Ministries. And during that same year, 57, 58, she was organizing a conference, YOU, Youth of Unity, which means kids from 14 to 20-ish. Most of the time they're done by the time they're 18. And she managed to reach out to all the people of color she could. And she got a whole bunch of kids with dark skin to show up for the first time, to this YOU conference. And the story is, she had, as the busload was arriving, as they would arrive, she'd send them to their rooms and tell them immediately to get into their swimming suits, and met them all at the swimming pool, which had not yet been desegregated, and told them all to jump in at once. And she made a statement that, see, the color does not wash off in the water. And from then on, Unity Village was totally desegregated. She went on to her own ministry, and as that ministry evolved, she started a storefront in Southside Chicago, just a few blocks, as I say, from where I was growing up in elementary school. And she became the district president, that is for the Midwest region, of the International New Thought Alliance, and the chairperson of the 60th International New Thought Alliance Congress that was held in Chicago in the fairly new conference center that had been built out over by the lake. And they had thousands of people attending, people from all over the world, all different colors. And it was a very, very powerful INTA conference and culture. That year, she began the process and bought 100 acres of land. It was land that had been manufacturing land, but manufacturing was going away in the 70s. So she was able to get a good deal on it in Southside Chicago. And the street that led to it, 164th, is now called Johnnie Colemon Way. She built the Christ Universal Temple and in there founded the Universal Foundation for Better Living and also her school. Now, there are 20 churches and study groups today still alive of that United Foundation for Better Living, and they're all over. They're, the USA, South America, Canada, all over the States. And when I attend the affiliated New Thought Network meetings in October, we almost always have one of her folks coming in from Jamaica. They're such marvelous people. I really enjoy getting to know those. In the next slide, we see a photograph of the Christ Universal Temple from the outside. This is as you're coming along Johnnie Colemon Way, looking at the building. And that, my friends, is a set of solar collectors on that building in Chicago in the 70s. More power to her. And she says, my church is not for you to come here and have a good time. My church is designated in such a way that in the event somebody asks you what happened at church, you can give them a principle that you were taught. And now it's up to you to practice it and use it. As I said, she was a teacher. And although she made great use of music and the authority of prayer and was able to be present in a way that was almost divine for many, many of her parishioners and congregants, it was fundamentally, here are the principles, here are the practices, now use it. So if we look in the next slide, we can see that not only were they an building at that time, they created an internet presence as soon as the internet came up. It was not in 74. I know that because in 78, I was involved in helping set up the public access to the internet. But very soon after, they created this website providing 24/7 support, and they had volunteers and paid staff being available to people, hundreds of people, all of the time. And if you look at the next slide, you can see what it might have looked like what it still does look like in the broadcast streaming versions of services at the Christ Temple there in Chicago. Huge choir. This man in front is one of the folks who has replaced Johnnie since her retirement in the 2006, and very, very powerful presentation of the principles and the practice and an invitation to use it, which led to the next slide, which is the 2024 version of the catalog for the school that they set up. This is the fall semester for the Johnnie Colemon Institute. It wasn't originally called that, but that's what it is now. This catalog, they're going to focus in the fall of 2024 on the power of spiritual consciousness, right? It runs from September through December, and the catalog includes course materials and books to read and outlines for what's going to happen in that classroom. Powerful, powerful woman doing a lot of really good work in a way that affected, as I say, thousands of people. So how come? How did all this come about? Well, remember, she had this terminal diagnosis, and she went to Unity to be healed. And in the next slide, she says, the only way my body could be healed was from a master physician, by the physician that made me in the first place. God is my healer. That was the phrase that woke her up. You don't have to die was the phrase that pulled her into Unity Village. And then she says, what God has done for me, he will do for you. And for thousands of people, mostly people of color, in a part of Chicago that is mostly people of color living there, who have felt really pushed around, who don't have the resources that everyone else has, that feel as if they're left out of the culture, to have this message, that God has done for me, he will do for you, was a powerful, powerful teaching, and still is. In the next point, she says, but there are some steps you have to take because sickness does not come from God. None of these so-called negative things come from God. God is good. God is love. God is everything positive you can name. And then she invites us to name all those positive things. Well, if you've listened to any of the material on Emma Curtis Hopkins, you know that that bullet point is lesson 1. God is good. God is love. God is strength. God is wellness. God is anything that is good. That is what God is. And then the next piece of that is God is everywhere present. Yes? Well, based on these fundamental ideas, Johnnie wrote a couple of books. The first one was based on her personal experience. So we go into the next slide, we'll see, Open Your Mind and Be Healed. That book, Open Your Mind and Be Healed, in the next slide, is the piece that woke many, many, many people up. And then, using that as her basic text, she went on to her next book. And I'm hoping the slides can change now. Because the next book is called It Works If You Work It. It works if you work it. And that, for many people, was like the tagline for Johnnie Colemon. It works if you work it. Now, I don't know about you, but I think we may have been hearing that same phrase in a lot of other environments. And people have picked it up and carried it forward. It works. It works. You are healed. It works. You have everything you need. It works. Everyone around you is loving and mutually supportive. It works. You have meaningful work. If you work it. And that is the big, big, big thing that Johnnie held. Imagine this 5'9.5" tall woman coming in and saying, this is how it is, this is how it works, and I want to see you do it. I can just see how people would be responding to that. So if we look at some of the teachings that are in that book and in those classes and on that Sunday platform, she says, when I found what caused all the negation that we express, I know the only reason people do not do better is because they don't know any better, the teacher coming forth. And they don't do better because nobody has taught them. She said in the early stages, this would be right about the time she was going through classes and being ordained, she says, I wanted everyone to hear this. So the only way I could get my message over is when my family would sit down to eat dinner. And her family at that time was her husband, her 2 sons, and her mom. She said, and I would say, you've got to listen to what I've learned, whether you want to or not. And I have to say, from the people that I knew who were involved in Christ Unity Temple, they heard that a lot. She said, I kept teaching them, her family, every opportunity. My family grew from 4 to my best friend. So she expanded her best friend, included it. And that's how it all got started, she said, at my dinner table. 50 years of ministry started at a dinner table. And you know, that's kind of how it goes in the New Thought movement. People have a few people in their living room. Some of the mega churches that I'm familiar with and have watched grow started with 8 or 9 folks in a living room and went on to, a few hundred meeting on a Sunday to several hundred and ultimately several thousand people. And that's basically what happened with Johnnie Colemon. In the next slide, we'll see one of the things that she did is try to help people understand that what they had been experienced must be called hell, and what could be experienced must be called heaven. She says, the greatest discovery that I made was to know that in every man, woman, and child, there is the Christ. And the Christ is God's idea of himself. God as Father, seeing God's self is what the Christ is, and it's in every human being. That's what the word namaste means. I see the divine in you. The divine in me beholds the divine in you. And she was helping people see that regardless of what the world was telling them, regardless of what the culture said, regardless of what anybody out there said, God's idea of God's self was alive in each and every one of them. And then she says, now when you stop and realize that all of God is inside of you, all of God is inside of each of us. Wow. She says, and the only reason you are not expressing it is because you don't know how. When you realize that heaven and hell are not places, but are states of mind, then you realize that when you are sick, you're in hell. When you're broke, you're in hell. There's states of minds. That state of mind that says, I am separated from God. But you can't be, because God is expressing God's self in and through and as each of us, right? And so she would help people see that it was a state they didn't have to live in if they knew what she had learned. And so she wanted to share that. The last point on that page, to be in heaven is to enjoy prosperity. And then she says, and prosperity does not just mean money. Prosperity means love, health, joy, and peace, all the good things. And then she says, but it does include money. Money, and I teach money because I need money in this world. And she goes on and say, I can't very well walk into a store and say, God is your source of supply, and walk out with a fur coat. So she's recognizing that in this time and space, prosperity includes the flow of resources that we call money. She also teaches other forms, as she says, love and health and joy and peace. And sometimes we have to start with one of those before we can allow the old ideas that we have had and that have been pushed into us over and over again about money to be replaced. So she includes money in her teaching, but recognizes that prosperity, the abundant life, is far more than that. And so in the next slide, we see that she was saying all of this happens because of what we are thinking. Everything, she says, begins in the mind. And if it begins in the mind, whatever the effects are in your world, life, and affairs, you must find the cause. Well, if it begins in the mind, the cause is in the mind, right? She says there's a cause for every effect. You've got to think the right thoughts, because every thought comes back to you. Remember with Wallace Wattles, he said you have to think in a certain way to get the certain results. And James Allen, as we think, so we are. This is the essence of new thought, isn't it? What thoughts will I choose to think in order to have a different kind of life experience? You've got to think the right thoughts, she says. Whatever you think, you have made it, right? We are constantly making our own life. She says it comes back from the substance of God. Whatever you think says, quote, I am the thinker that thinks the thought that makes the thing. You may have heard the song that came from that line. Now, when she talks about substance, Johnnie is very down to earth. She doesn't talk about the quantum field. Nope. She talks about dough, bread dough, cookie dough, dough. This lump that is formless, that can't even hold its shape. It's just stuff, right? And it remains just stuff, formless and shapeless, until you come along and press it into the form. Maybe even use a cookie cutter to define the form. That's the substance of God. Your thinking is the cookie cutter. Your mind is the pressing of the substance. And then the thought determines the shape. So she says in that last point, therefore, you must be very careful about what you think, what you say, and what you feel. Because what I think will not hurt you. It will only hurt me. So as we're pressing that formless substance with our minds and we're shaping it with the cookie cutter of our thoughts and our words, we are the only ones who experience the results. Very simple, very down to earth, very powerful. Now, Johnnie was a Bible user and teacher, and in Southside Chicago, that was a really important thing. And in fact, she was in that part of Southside Chicago that not only did I grow up in, but, well, a woman named Michelle, who we know as Michelle Obama, grew up in. She was on the other side of the Midway from where I was, but we were in the same neighborhood. And that was the world that Michelle Obama knew as well. It was a Bible-based world. And when Michelle's husband was elected to the Senate, Barack Hussein Obama became an occasional speaker at the Christ Universal Temple of Johnnie Colemon. And when Martin Luther King or any of the other folks who were freedom riders came into town, Jesse Jackson, they would speak at the Christ Universal Temple. And when Harold Washington was made mayor of Chicago, he would speak there. And when he died, that's where his funeral was. That temple and the power of thought that Johnnie embodied became the center for a lot more than just spiritual light in that part of the world. In fact, she was so powerful and her teaching spread so far into so many different countries that she started being recognized outside of the New Thought movement. And if we look at the next slide, we can see some of the ways she was recognized. She is at Morehouse College. They have a portrait of her in the Martin Luther King Jr. International Center at Morehouse College. The International New Thought Alliance granted her the 20th Century Ministry of the Century Award for what she was doing, making New Thought available around the world. She received an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree from her alma mater, from Wiley College, after she had had to work so hard to just demonstrate that she was capable of earning a bachelor's. She has a portrait in the DuSable Museum as African-American history maker. She earned or was granted a Doctor of Humane Letters from Monrovia College in Liberia, West Africa, and then the Industrial Institute of the African Methodist Episcopal Church there offered her a second Doctor of Divinity degree. And the Institute for African American Youth Development in Chicago called her a Chicago living legend. Her youth program made it possible for many, many, many young people not to get caught up in the gangs culture that was common at Hyde Park and South Shore High School at that time. Yes, unfortunately so. And finally, not finally in terms of the timing, but in terms of the size, I think, the National Coalition of Black Women gave her the Candace Award as one of the top 100 Black women affecting the culture in 1987. People recognized what it was that Johnnie stood for. And she stood, and she insisted. If you've ever had one of those teachers who said, this is how it is, this is how it's going to be, and this is how you're going to do it, because I know if you do it this way, you will succeed. That's the kind of teacher that Johnnie was. Indeed, she was. And so, after all of that work, after all of that recognition, after all the capacity that she built among the thousands of people, in 2006, 50 years after she was ordained, Johnnie retired. And if we look in the next slide, we realize, yeah, she had those two sons. She had them, and she was married while she was developing her ministry and building a megachurch, thousands of people, the school and the federation. She retired there in 2006, and just before Christmas, December 23, 2014, she passed on at Mercy Hospital in Chicago. And I think it's kind of fair to say that this could well be her epitaph. All you have to do is let God do what he has to do in and through you. You get out of the way, and God will take care of the rest. He's taken care of me all of my life. The Reverend Dr. Johnnie Colemon, the incredible New Thought pioneer, evangelist, builder. She actually was on the construction site with her hard hat when that temple was being built in the New Thought movement. Now, there's another little side story I'm going to share with you. Many of us are familiar with a TV series called Touched by an Angel, and some of us knew its number one star well before she got on that show, Della Reese. If you've ever heard her sing or ever seen her perform, you know this is a spirit-driven woman. But you may not know that she is a unity preacher trained by and working with Johnnie Colemon in Southside Chicago. She has her own small church, or did when she was still on the planet. And it was a unity church. And she would sing and she would preach and she would teach. And she was just as determined in her teachings as Johnnie was. These are the principles. These are the practices. It only works if you work it. And as someone who has been teaching for a few years myself and teaching these principles and practices, I have to say they're absolutely right. It only works if you work it, if you do the practices, if you make it your own way of thinking, speaking, feeling, acting in every aspect of your life. The principles are clear. Recognize that there is one beingness that we are all part of, and it is fully present in each and every one of us as everything we can imagine being good. Good is all that is. And if we can name that good, and we need to, the practice is to name that good. Name it as our perfect health. Name it as our prosperity. Name it as our children doing well. Name it as the country doing well. Name it as the world having a harmonious way of being. Name it, name it, name it, name it. Every day. That's the first step in the practice. The second step is to not buy into anything else. Right? All those, she said, so-called negative things are not created by God. They have nothing to do with God's creation. They're the outpicturings of our own thoughts. We took that formless dough, we used a cookie cutter with an ugly image, and we thought that was God. No, honey. That was our thoughts. So the second major discipline is to never go to the thoughts that create anything other than the good. Lesson 3 is to continually affirm that the good is present. The good is what is unfolding. This is a practice. It can't be something we just go, oh yeah, I know. No. It is how we build our presence on the planet. It's how Johnnie did it. It's how Della Reese did it. It's how we do it. And all the thousands of people those two wonderful women have taught. Yes? And finally, regardless of the appearances, we hold on to this truth. The appearance may be, as in Johnnie's case, a terminal diagnosis, what I call a wake-up call. It's time to pay attention to truth, not the culture. Yeah? That's what it is. Now, it may be that we have an appearance that's much more mild. It may simply be a cloudy day or a rainy day when we need sunshine. We hold the truth regardless of the appearances. Emma Curtis Hopkins, who taught the Fillmores, who taught the teachers, who taught Johnnie Colemon, used to say that our faith is like a gallant ship sailing on stormy seas. We keep going forward. We keep adjusting the sails, knowing we're headed for that port. We know that the seas can calm and do calm as we head in the direction of our good, of knowing that our good is present. Yeah. And Johnnie and Della and all the folks involved in the Universal Foundation for Better Living have encouraged people with these ideas and these practices and given them written materials and given them the logic and given them all the things they need to overcome centuries of the kind of behaviors that colonial powers impose on other peoples all over the planet and have for centuries. And through this foundation and through these churches and these centers and these books and these television programs and all the ways that Johnnie was able to create for us and for all people, we can be the power and the presence that is who we truly are. We just need to work it. It always works when we work it. And I give thanks to Johnnie. As I say, I grew up not far from when she was establishing her ministry. And I know children whose life were changed because of her ministry. My family had been going in the Unitarian direction at the time, so I didn't get to play there. But I did see the results, and I very much appreciate that. And I give thanks for the world that she had the strength and the commitment. That big, bad John Haley's little girl had the strength and the commitment to be the big, beautiful, powerful New Thought minister, the Reverend Dr. Johnnie Colemon, beloved J.C. Thank you for joining me today and learning about this branch of New Thought that has been so powerful in the 20th century and is making a difference in the 21st. Have a great week.